Hi and welcome to this video of the Simplified opening series. In this video I will talk about one of the most popular ways lately to meet the King's Indian defense that White has been employed by literally all the strongest players in the world, and one that has lately been, well, theoretically been quite challenging for Black to deal with. So the system in question arises after the moves d4, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, d6, now bishop e2, short castle and bishop e3. Now with the idea of the system is that by delaying the development of the knight to f3, White keeps the d1 h5 diagonal open, and that he can use to go h4 g4, not so much to create an attack against Black's kingside, but as so much as to prevent Black's typical counterplay on the king side by advancing there first. So before continuing on the line I'm going to suggest, I would like to say that when I was playing the King's Indian in my, let's say, beginning of my chess career, I had this kind of a conceptual way of playing it, in a sense that against the main line, let's say with knight f3 here, I always go for the Mar del Plata with e5 and so on. But against all the other lines, mostly all the other lines, like the, I don't know, bishop e2, bishop e3 didn't quite exist there. But let's say the Averbach variation with bishop g5, the Semish with f3, all the other side lines or whatever it is, I would just go c5 and try to enter the Benoni. I have to say that I was inspired or pushed in that direction, yeah, by Fischer's games, because that's what he also did against the, let's say, the knight f3 developments. He would go e5, typical King's Indian stuff, but against all the other, let's say, lines, he would go for c5 and try to enter the Benoni. And this worked pretty well for me, and I think it's probably worth revisiting, as it's has been neglected in a way as a way of playing the sidelines against the King's Indian. This probably has something to do with the fact that Benoni is not considered to be a great opening mostly, but in practice the Benoni has been, I think, working pretty well for quite some players who have the knack and feeling for it. So that means that after castles bishop e3, we will be taking a look at the lines with c5. Before continuing, I have to say that, for example, in my course, King's Indian Simplified on Chessable and chess.com, I recommended another line, because in that course I suggested like a more conceptual way of playing the King's Indian, which is not conceptually playing c5, but playing e5 whenever possible. And the line I suggested there is actually very sharp, but still in good theoretical shape for Black, even though Black players have not been going in that direction lately. So e5, d5, and now knight a6 immediately, not wasting time on a5. The point being that the knight comes to c5 and puts pressure on the e4 pawn. So g4, knight c5, f3, h5, g5, knight h7, and then f6, opening the f file, is the line I recommended there. It leads to quite interesting, quite sharp play, and what is, I think, more important for a repertoire-based line, quite similar in the King's Indian style, King's Indian dynamism in these positions when Black plays e5. But for this video, we will check the Benoni attempts with c5. So here, obviously, the critical move is d5. Knight f3 is bad because knight g4 immediately poses issues to White on the dark squares. So this is pretty bad for White after knight g4. There is one alternative, which is d takes e5, which gives the game a completely different character. After queen a5, there is an attack on d4 pawn because the knight is pinned on c3, so bishop d2, queen c5, and knight f3. And this is obviously some Marozzi type of a structure, but a bit peculiar because the knight is on f3, the bishop is still on d2, White is not ideally placed, and the standard move here is the move bishop e6. I also checked bishop g4, which also works. The idea being that when that knight is eliminated, Black will have better grip on the dark squares because the knight is controlling those squares. But let's check bishop e6, which is also quite direct because it attacks the pawn on c4. And here, strangely enough, you would expect white to play bishop e3 automatically, and that's what majority of players have done. But the engine actually suggests the weird move queen c2 as best. This already gives you an idea that this is probably worth trying as a line for black, because I mean, who would play queen c2 here? But even if they do, the position is still okay for black. So knight c6, castles, and now bishop g4. So again, with same ideas, yeah. And if bishop a3, queen a5, standard Maróczy stuff, rook comes to c8. On the c file, let's say a3, rook c8, b4, grabbing some space, but now the queen swings all the way to the king side. The point being that it's not so easy to get rid of these pieces here, as h3 runs into bishop takes h3, gh3, queen h3 with good compensation. So you can explore this more deeply, but black is doing fine here. So this is the weird way that the engine wants to play for white, but we should actually check what happens after bishop e3. And here people have played automatically in Maróczy style queen a5 and so on, but queen c8 is actually very strong, keeping the attack on the pawn on c4, and things work out tactically for black. Yeah, for example, b3 runs into d5. You know, immediately white needs to be careful. So there are problems on the c file, on the long diagonal. Let's say ed5, knight d5 is already an advantage for black. Knight d5, bishop d5. The rook is hanging, and after rook c1, bishop e4, the threat is bishop b2, and black has an advantage already here. So white should take cd5, but now queen c3, bishop d2, queen c8, rook d1, and now nothing wrong with queen d7, but the engine wants to be even more exact, like with knight c6. dc6, knight takes e4. And again, no problems for black here. Yeah, if c7, simply queen d7, and that pawn is safely under control with rook c8. So b3 is not so great. Neither is queen b3, and then knight g4, another standard maneuver in these positions, attacking the bishop. Bishop goes back, and knight e5, attacking the pawn on c4 again. And if bishop knight e5, d takes e5, and the knight is coming to d4. Excellent for black already. Again, rook c1 is a kind of a semi-bluffing move to see if black can take the pawn on c4, and black can and should take the pawn on c4. After knight d5, bishop e2. Again, this works well for black. Let's say check on e7, king h8, take on d6, but queen g4 is the saving move. Yeah, counter-attacking g2 and e4, and black is doing fine here. And if after bishop e2, queen e2, then queen g4 again, attacking g2 and e4. And let's say if white goes after the rook on a8 with knight c7, knight c6, take on a8, rook a8, castles, queen e4, 2 pawns and a knight for exchange, and wonderful pawn structure, pawn mass. Black is at least equal here, no problems. And the last move to check after queen c8, knight d5. More than one good move here. Knight c6, queen, knight c6, queen d8. But the engine likes rook e8, and the point is that after, let's say, the pawn on e4 is hanging, yeah? So the rook has defended the pawn on e7. The point is that after knight d2, black can continue bishop d5, cd5, and e6. That's the point of the rook on e8. So it's already on the e file. And gets good counterplay. And knight f6, bishop f6, queen d2. Again, nothing wrong with knight c6, but the engine again suggests an ultra precise move, bishop d7. Yeah? The point is to get the bishop to c6 to attack the pawn on e4 in, again, standard Maróczy maneuver. Castles, bishop c6, bishop d3, and knight d7. And knight's coming to c5 or to e5, a5, standard Maróczy moves, and black is fine. So this is the move dc5. You see, I mean, different structure, the Maróczy structure, but with this very nice, I think, idea of bishop e6, queen c8, black is very, very comfortable, and no problems whatsoever, really. So let's check the critical move. d5, e6, going for the Benoni, now knight f3, standard move. h3 is a bit slow, because after ed, rook e8, knight f3, bishop f5, black is fine. Yeah, knight e4 is the main idea. And here things can get messy also. For example, knight d2 stops knight e4, but allows the typical sacrifice, rook e3, f3, queen e7. Standard sacrifice, exchange sacrifice for black in this symmetrical, let's say, Benoni after ed5, and very good compensation. But like I said, things can get messy. Let's say queen b3, knight bd7, and let's say g4, yeah, knight e4, gf5, take on c3, bc3, and queen e3. Full rook down for now, but black will likely take one light piece, probably the bishop, as the king needs to probably escape to the queen side, and then the wonderful dark squared bishop, counterplay along the dark squares, and more compact position. A lot of weaknesses for white gives black a good compensation. Similarly, things can get interesting after g4 when black has two ways to play this. One is a bit more positional, let's say bishop e4 castles, take on f3, bishop f3, and the exchange sacrifice, rook e3, f3, queen e7, queen d3, knight fd7, and thanks to this eternal piece on e5, yeah, black has good compensation. Or the more tactical, let's say, dealing with that bishop d7, not to c8 but to d7, so is that b5 can be played. Let's say bishop g5, b5, cb5, a6, again with compensation. Or in case of knight d2, h5, g5, knight h7, h4, and now take on c3, bc, and bishop c8 to allow for the knight to come to d7, e5, or sometimes even b6, depending on circumstances. And again, very sharp position, but black is not worse. So there's a move h3. Yeah. Normally white plays knight f3, ed5. Now again, ed5, bishop f5, something we looked at. So cd5 is the critical move. And here black has a choice. Starting position, arguably the critical position for the whole system with c5. Black has two ways. One is the more, let's say, direct, confrontational, calculational one. Starts with the move b5. And the other one is the more positional, let's say, keeping the Benoni position, but with less concrete variations. It has to be said that if black decides on this second part to play the more Benoni style, but without forcing variations with the move bishop g4, he still needs to be quite exact later on, because the position is a bit dangerous for black positionally. But let's check the direct solution, b5. This works, and but black needs to be ready to play very aggressively, which shouldn't really be a problem for a Benoni and King's Indian player. Now the only move for white is the move e5. Carlsen played bishop b5, but this is shows the justification of the line. Knight e4, typical Benoni trick. Knight e4, queen a5 check, and check, and the attack on the bishop on b5 means that black regains the piece. Knight c3, bishop c3, bc, queen b5, bishop b3, queen b3, bishop a6, and black is at least equal, even though Carlsen beat Jordan Van Forest in an online game from this position. So that's harmless. So e5 is the only move, and now d5, bishop c5. Now there are two moves, b4 and rook e8, but I think rook e8 is the better one. So we'll concentrate on that one. Bishop takes b5 and knight bd7. So very sharp position. Black is a pawn down, but white's king is still in the center, and the bishops are a bit loose. Their ideas with e4. So this is quite sharp, and black has good compensation here. The worst move has been played by Erigaisi here, bishop d7, knight d7. It's bad because after the bishop retreats, bishop e3, bishop a6, the king is stuck in the center and black has an advantage. The bishop should retreat from c5, and there are two options, going to e3 or going to a3. Let's check both. Bishop a3, a6, bishop c6, and e4. One of the main ideas, harassing the knight, opening the long diagonal. Knight d4 and knight e5. A great sacrificial line here, sacrificing a full rook, which white should not take because that loses. Bishop takes e8, knight d3 check, king f1 and knight g4. And f2 is collapsing. The knight on d4 is hanging. The queen can join the attack from f6 or from h4. and black is winning from here. You can check this more deeply, but black is winning. So after short castle, after knight e5, short castle should be played, but after knight c6, knight c6, queen d7, the position remains very sharp, but black has good compensation here. Yeah, the pair of bishops, especially the strong dark squared bishop, and the somewhat weird position of the white pieces. The knight on c6 looks okay, but does very little. The bishop on a3 is a bit out of the game somewhat, and it's sharp, it's unclear, but black isn't worse. The alternative is to drop the bishop back to e3, but this runs into knight g4. Yeah, and after castles, take on e3, fe3, rook b8. A fine idea for black here is to go rook f8 and then f5, and just play positionally with the being pawned down, but the pair of bishops and the possibility to advance on the king side. Again, this requires a bit more exploration from black side, but black is fine with good compensation. So now you see that these lines with b5, they work, but they do require some homework and some aggressive play. Now let's check the alternative, which is the more slow, let's say the slower way of playing, bishop g4. For those who don't play the Benoni, you should know that the exchange of the light squared bishop for a knight is very it's favorable for black, as the light squared bishop is the most problematic piece for black in the Benoni, as this pawn chain e4 d5 severely limits its mobility by controlling the light squares. So when bishop g4 is played, if white can help it, he prefers to exchange the bishop for bishop and not bishop for knight, because his own light squared bishop is also limited by its own pawns. So knight d2 is played, take on e2, queen e2, rook e8, and now short castle. And now here, standard Benoni position. Yeah, I explored two plans, and they basically are distinguished by where the knight goes, whether the knight goes to d7 and goes to a6. And I came to the conclusion that the more promising one is the one with knight a6. The knight d7, knight e5 is worse, simply because there is not enough counterplay that black can master after white simply strengthens the center with f3, and black has very little to do there. Whereas with the knight on a6, there are two ideas, the principled one being knight c7, b5, but there is another one when white, for example, goes a4, the knight can jump to b4. So this is a bit more flexible. So h3 is the main move played by white, and here knight c7 is the let's say the natural move after knight a6, but there is something to be said about queen d7, and the point is that that move also prepares b5 by controlling that square, but it's more flexible in a sense that a4 can be now be met by knight b4, and the knight has nicely lodged on b4. Knight c2 is a threat, sometimes c4, knight d3 in the future, yeah, after rook c8 or something. So this is fine for black. And the point being that if white continues as with rook a d1, which is natural, concentrating the pieces in the center, this will turn out to be imprecise. As we will see, it's better to put the other rook to d1, and we will see why. The point is that the rook abandons the a file. So now, after knight c7, a4, b5, a b5 and rook b8, we see that the rook would have been quite handy on the a file. As it is, black manages to regain the pawn, open the b file, and obtain counterplay. So let's say rook a1, knight b5 already, yeah? Queen d3, knight d4, and black is doing fine. So that is why white should play the super precise rook fd1, foreseeing this, obviously, something that we know, and white should know, I mean, if they are to play super precise in this position, rook fd1, but now rook a b8, preparing b5. Yeah, again, a4, knight b4, so queen f3, knight b4, threatening knight c2, knight d4, or just attacking the bishop on e3, bishop g5, attacking the knight, knight h5, and this is pretty unclear. I mean, typical Benoni position with a lot of things happening. The tactical justification for black is that the knight is not lost after g4 because there is h6, and if the bishop drops back, yeah, the knight will also drop back, while as bishop h4, g5, gh5, gh4 is okay for black. Yeah, the white structure in the center has been weakened, or the king also. So something like king h8 or king h7, bishop e5, rook g8, yeah, can give black counterplay. Also, don't forget that the knight can easily jump to c2 d4, or the queen leaves f3 to d3, and quite sharp, but black is fine. So queen d7 is actually an interesting way to play here. After knight c7, the threat is to go b5, even sacrifice a pawn there, yeah, because after black white recaptures, there is rook b8, rook b2, but also the pawn on e4 is hanging once the knight takes on b5, yeah. So a4 should be played. And here the important thing for black is that slower play doesn't quite work. I'll let you analyze by yourselves a6, a5, which is good for white, or rook b8, queen d3, which is also good for white. You can check these by yourselves. They are not quite, they don't give quite the counterplay that black is hoping for, but there is a tactical solution, and you should know it, which is knight takes e4. Yeah, knight e4 and f5. The point is that when the knight moves f4, thanks to the pin on the file, black will regain the piece. And here, whichever pawn white takes on d6 or c5, black is fine. Let's say knight d6, queen d6, or bishop g5, queen d7, black will regain the piece still, or knight c5, dc5, queen d5, queen c4, sorry, which looks the most tricky, yeah. But now black is just in time to take the pawn on d5, bishop takes c3, queen c3, knight d5, queen c4, queen b3, or queen b3, queen d6, and the knight on d5 will be safely protected by the rook, and black is equal. Yeah, the king is a little bit weak, but the good centralization means that objectively black is doing fine here. So there it is. I think an interesting way to play the Benoni against this bishop e2, bishop e3 system, especially it diverts white completely from the intended play of g4, h4 on the king side in the king's Indian positions. But also, especially if you employ this line with the b5 ideas in mind, which I think are very dynamic, offering very good counterplay and compensation, I think it can be a good practical solution to the bishop e2, bishop e3 line, which, like I said, has been played by pretty much everybody lately against the king's Indian. So guys, thanks for watching this video. Make sure you check my Chessable courses, available both on Chessable and chess.com. I mentioned the King's Indian Simplified. If you're interested in the opening, you can have a look at it. Also, make sure, if you like reading about chess, subscribe to my Substack. Every week I send out one interesting essay on a chess topic. And in case you haven't done so already, smash that subscribe button. Smash it once is enough, but still, to make sure that you don't miss future videos and you keep in touch. So thanks for watching, and see you soon. Cheers.